Greetings, chess players! My name is Chris Torres. Above me, this is Vinay Bhat. He has written this wonderful, wonderful book, How I Became a Chess Grandmaster. And if you are participating in our free online summer chess camp, July edition, you have the opportunity to win an autographed copy of this book. And the top point earner in each of the three major skill level groups will get a copy. And it is honestly a book that's just wonderful for all skill levels of players. It's very instructional. And no matter how good you are, you'll gain a lot of insight from it. And it's personally written, so it feels like Vinay's teaching you when you read through it, and it's inspirational, it's exciting, and it's historical. It's an important era in a recent era in California chess, and it takes a little while to gain perspective. Um, if Vinay had maybe written, a lot of this book when he was in his 20s, it would be a lot different than the book we have in front of us, which he's gained perspective. He took time off. From chess, um, and reflected on things, and it's really a wonderful book. Congratulations again, Vinay, on this getting this book out. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the kind words. And yeah, I think it definitely feels great to have the book
Hmm.
out. And yeah, my week's going well. Happy
Yeah,
Friday.
happy Friday. How are sales going with this book? Um,
I think they're going pretty
awesome.
well. The reviews have been really positive. So I know you shared some extremely kind words about the book. But I've also seen John Watson wrote a really positive
Hmm.
review in Chess
Yeah.
Life. And I've seen a couple others in, I think, maybe American Chess
Ooh, that's a
Magazine.
good one.
Uh,
Yeah. Oh.
in There's a British magazine called Chess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so a few reviews like that have been pretty positive. And yeah, I think some people have been interested in me coming and doing some talks at their chess club and stuff like that. So I recently was in Seattle. I'll actually be in Toronto and New York, hopefully let's call it a little over a month from now. So
Wow.
um, the book tour is underway.
So when you're in New York, you going to the Marshall Chess Club? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah, sure. That should be fun.
Yeah, good stuff. I wanted to, since we have a largely scholastic group.
Hmm.
Um, I know you're not a parent yourself, but your parents did a good job, and it was noticed by people in scholastic chess such as myself. And I'm just curious, on a couple of things. Like, let's
Hmm.
say, young Vinay, were you self motivated to, do tactic puzzles? Or did your parents give you, small rewards for studying? What was it like, when say you were like 10 years old?
No, it's a great question because I think having grown up and seen a lot of other junior chess players, I felt my parents took a maybe a little bit more hands-off
Mm-hmm.
approach. They were encouraging without being kind of
Mm-hmm.
pushing. I enjoyed doing tactics problems. My parents didn't necessarily give me a reward for that, but they would often help me, set problems up, or like they bought me some new books, things like that. So my mom is the one who actually taught me how to play chess. My dad learned how to play a couple years
Mm-hmm.
later, and both of them actually drove us around. My older brother also learned right at the same time, and so uh, my mom or my dad would drive us around to local tournaments. My mom would often study chess with my older brother and
Mm-hmm.
me. And she helped us a ton because she had never played a tournament before. So she was reading some of these books for the first time too,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like Logical Chess, Move
Oh,
by
it's a great
Move,
book.
by like Irving
Yeah.
Chernev, and like actually there are a lot of Chernev and
Mm-hmm.
Reinfeld books that were like my favorites from back in the day. Um, I really enjoyed doing tactics puzzles, just in general. Like I did a lot of say like one, two move, three move kind of tactic checkmate
Sure.
problems. There's a book called I think it's called 1001 Different Ways to Checkmate by Fred
Yeah. Yeah.
Reinfeld.
He has a couple
Um,
different of these 1001s. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I ended up doing, I think I got that one plus there's 1001 winning
Yes.
combinations or something
Yeah.
like that. I went through those really regular. I just in general, I enjoy solving
Mm-hmm.
puzzles. So now I like doing like little word puzzles or like mini crosswords. Those kinds of things are like I find them kind of cool and rewarding on their own. And so actually for my parents, they didn't have to give me some incentive to do those. One of the things though that I struggled with was actually I enjoyed doing those
Mm-hmm.
things more so than any other chess study. And so for me to get better at some point, I needed to actually study some different things. So tactics puzzles were the easy thing for me to work on.
Sure.
Studying more maybe strategic play, studying more end games, studying openings were all a little bit tougher. I didn't enjoy that much that part like on my own as much early
Yeah.
on.
I mean, different people enjoy, different aspects and yeah, those 1001 books. First of all, I will post on my blog the three books that Vinay just mentioned, because they're easy to obtain. They aren't very expensive because they've been in print forever, and I have all three. They're very common. Chernev, for those of you who have never heard of logical chess move by move, he makes a remark about every single move in the games that he presents, and it really helps to explain. If you're a parent watching this and you want to help your child understand chess better, you can read through that book with your child, and it's like having a chess coach in the room, explaining what's going on. Interesting that your mom taught you how to play chess. I think that was also the case with Anand, with
Oh yeah,
Viswanathan
yeah,
Anand.
yeah,
I think that
yeah.
was also the case, and yeah, it's an interesting bond. A parent gets with their child. Now, your mom was also studying with you and your brother. Um, at what point did you guys start to surpass her? Maybe.
Oh, I would say my brother actually got better
Mm-hmm.
like early on faster than I did. So he's 5 years older. So I learned how to play around six and a half, and he was about 11 and a half. And actually, I think he probably got better than both of us within maybe it was like a
Mm-hmm.
year and a half or so. My mom was rated about, I think around maybe 13, fourteen
Mm-hmm.
hundred at first. Actually, I think she got a little bit better by reading
Sure.
us some of those
Sure.
same books. Um, but my brother, he was always a little bit higher rated than me until we were both about maybe 1900 or 2000. And he was in high school at the time, and that's when I finally passed him, actually. But I played dozens of practice games against my brother, and actually, like, it's funny because I kept a good record of a lot of my old games,
Mm-hmm.
even the practice games. And I realized when I was putting this book together I lost a lot of games to him.
Yeah.
um, he and I for whatever reason I didn't actually mind losing that much. I enjoyed playing a lot, and so even though he put up a huge score against me, these were
Mm-hmm.
not rated games or anything. I kept playing and I kept going
That's
back.
how you're going. You had an advantage having an older brother who was a higher
Hmm.
rated chess player in the house.
Yeah,
That's a definite advantage. And I just want to clarify. I meant no disrespect to your mom when I asked, how long it took for you guys to surpass the in classical music. There's a famous violin method that became very popular. It's called the Suzuki method in the 80s, and the parents would learn classical violin with their young child, knowing full well that the goal, that the young child is growing, and forming connections faster, and would surpass the parent. But it was a very successful approach to classical violin, and it seems like in a way your mom was doing that with you. She was learning with you, reading the books with you, and knowing full well that at some point you guys are going to surpass her. But she gets to share that experience with you. Yeah.
no, for sure. One reason I'm smiling is because I did actually, so I was
Mm-hmm.
born in the 80s and I did learn the violin
Mm-hmm.
for just 1 year. But I didn't actually enjoy it. So I only learned the
Yeah.
violin for the 1 year. But the Suzuki method was really common. I don't know if it still is common, but it certainly was like I think in both piano and maybe violin, a few different instruments, I think it was
Yeah.
very common at
Yeah.
the time.
And I think it has fallen out of fashion a little bit. And in a way, it's kind of sad because um, having your parent engaged in the activity that that the young person's trying to excel in creates an extra bond and extra parent-child time, and certainly things like piano or chess are very cross generational. Any other chess players in your family, Vinay? Any uncles, aunts, things like this who are?
No uncles and aunts. So my grandfather, so my on my mom's side, so my mom's dad was also a casual chess
Mm-hmm.
player in India, and he's the one who taught my mom how to play. But otherwise, outside in the family, nobody had ever played a tournament
Mm-hmm.
before. But that was where sort of she got interested in the game because her dad had taught a lot
Mm-hmm.
of her family. And then she
Yeah, well, I
passed
mean,
that
things
on.
weren't as organized in India as they are now.
Oh
After
yeah, for
the
sure.
effect
Yeah.
of Viswanathan Anand, but there were
Hmm.
a lot of strong chess players who were just playing casually, um, and now it's all the All India Chess Federation's very organized, and I don't even know how many grandmasters um, are in India now. I used to, keep tabs of this. Um, and Viswanathan Anand was the first. A lot of people don't know this, but he was the first Indian Grand Master. And his effect, I mean, he was a rock star in India, and his effect, and he's I've never met him personally. I want to meet him personally. um, his effect has just been profound. Maybe more than any other. The only you can look back in the United States in the 1970s and talk about the Fisher boom, but I think that
Hmm.
even pales in comparison to what. Because the United States, we had some other grandmasters. I mean, I was just talking with Jim, yesterday we were looking at a Samuel Reshevsky game. And if Fisher
Sure.
didn't come
Yeah.
along, I mean, Reshevsky was towing the line, you know. Yeah, we had a boom, and a lot of people learned because he was on the Tonight Show and this and that. But I mean, Anand was just everywhere in India, you know, just household name, and by all accounts, a much nicer guy than than Bobby Fischer as well. And so just a incredible celebrity and inspiration to so many players in India right now. And he talked to you about your book, right?
Yeah. That was actually really made my day, made my week. So I've met him a couple times, and I think he's a very
Mm-hmm.
nice person. He has like a great memory. So even though I think I met him, I talked to him for the first time maybe in 2009 after I had seen him before but never really spoke with him. And then I talked to him again maybe 8 or 9 years later. He remembered sort of like that we'd spoken before and where. Even though I wasn't playing much chess at the time, he still remembered like some of the openings or like techniques I was better known
Wow.
for.
Yeah.
So he was interested in like, hey, you're a French defense player. Like, did you see this game recently that I played in this line? Like, and he reached out to me in early June to say nice job on the book, which really made my day because kind of like you said, he was an inspiration. He's my chess
Mm-hmm.
hero in a lot of ways. And so growing up in the 80s and 90s, seeing him sort of make strides forward, I think did a lot for just Indian chess players, Indian American chess players. Um, and yeah, I think you can see it now that like India has so many of the like top junior
Mm-hmm.
players in the world. A lot of them are, they're getting hooked on chess sort of in the, in the on the basis of sort of Anand's success over the last
Yeah.
few
Yeah.
decades.
And he's got incredible longevity. He's still, you know, I mean, I'm not going to, you know, talk poorly of some other players, but you know, some of his predecessors have fallen off, you know, with their level of play, and Anand can like still sit down and kick some
Yeah.
rear end with the best chess players out there, and he's, you know, married and has kids, and yeah, I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at the ages on like the top 20,
Hmm.
30, 50 list, Anand's the only guy there who's like
Yeah,
over
I mean,
50.
it's
So,
incredible. It absolutely is. And he called you to congratulate you on your book. I
yeah.
mean, that's a huge honor. Let's go ahead and take a look at some chess games. You sent me a couple chess games, and let's see. The first one I've got loaded in was played in 2006 against
Hmm.
Julio Zuniga, Granda Zuniga. And where was this played?
Uh, this is played in Spain in a city called Balaguer, so it's a little bit
Mhm.
outside
I was going to ask
Barcelona.
you when you met
Um,
Anand in 2009, was that in Spain?
That was actually in
Ah,
Delhi
okay.
in India. So I had actually we had played in some tournaments where sometimes there's like the Super Grandmaster round
Hmm.
robin happening, and then there's call it like an open tournament below. So I had seen him at a few tournaments like that before, but never actually spoken to him like uh, had an actual
Sure.
conversation until that 2009 event in India. So um, at this one, this tournament in Spain that from the game against Granda, it was an open tournament. Granda is a self-taught
Hmm.
grandmaster in a lot of ways. And so I think he reached some pretty high peaks of maybe 2670, 2680 FIDE. So top 50 probably player in the world. And at the time, I was an international master. So I had finished college. I was starting to play a little bit more chess again, and this game was pretty important for me, partly because I hadn't played a whole lot in a while, but it helped sort of set me back on the path of like getting
Mm-hmm.
back into chess and then actually getting the Grandmaster title. So th this was an early round game in a tournament that ended up being
Okay,
pretty
let's
key for
let's go
me.
ahead and take a look. So move one d4, um, and knight f6, and then you went c4, and pawn to e6, and then knight f3, and bishop e4. So we'll go ahead and pause right here. Go ahead, tell us what we're looking at.
Sure. This is technically called the Bogo Indian
Mm-hmm.
defense from the black side. And what was interesting about it at this point was that you mentioned I played 1d4. I wasn't typically a 1d4 player, but because I hadn't been playing chess for a couple years, a couple tournaments before this, I decided, hey, like I haven't been studying openings anyway. Let me just play something different on move one. It'll surprise everyone. I'll be just as on unfamiliar ground as,
Mm-hmm.
I would be otherwise. I was
Yeah.
typically a 1e4 player. And then Granda, I think here was, I think he was also he plays a lot of different openings. I got the sense that for him it's a little bit of like what does he feel
Mm-hmm.
like playing any given day. But his repertoire is pretty wide, and so I didn't really know what to expect against him. I had struggled against some other GMs in a previous tournament. So just north of Barcelona, there's a small country called Andorra, and I had played a couple GMs there in that tournament. I think I had won one but lost two. And so when he went, I partly went for this opening because I had some bad experience against another GM in a
Mm-hmm.
similar kind of line. And so I was just trying to avoid some of that here. But my next move, I think I played
Uh-huh. And you had
knight
a
bd2
choice.
here.
I mean, you could
Yeah,
uh, I don't know, too much about the Bogo Indian in particular, but bishop d2, knight d2, or knight c3 look fine. Is that right?
all of them are actually all played by grandmasters as well. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no right or wrong move for white here. The reason I played knight bd2 is because I felt like I thought I could force black to
Mm-hmm.
take that knight on d2. My plan is to play
Sure.
a3 next and kick the bishop away. I figured if I can do that, then I get the advantage of the bishop pair. And I thought, okay, that's a stable long-term advantage. Let me try that. The alternative approach with bishop d2 or knight
Mm-hmm.
c3, with bishop d2, basically you're just trying to say, hey, look, like we can trade bishops, but then I'll just be a little bit ahead in
Mm-hmm.
development. And I think that's where you can see right now by playing knight bd2, the bishop on c1 doesn't have any prospects. And so that's where you could say, well, okay, let me trade that off. I'll put the knight on d2 anyway, and we'll just play that position. So there's a lot of different ways for white to play this too. And actually, even in this position here for black, there are a few different options. Black can play a move like d5, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Larry Christensen actually beat me with this move later on, a few years later. A number of other players have also played castles against me, which is what Granda did
Mm-hmm.
in this game. But at the time, this was the first time I was actually playing this opening from either color.
Well, your opponent here does castle, and then
Hmm.
you play a3, trying to force this exchange. It's
Yep,
not quite forced, though. I mean, if he goes bishop a5, you can trap the bishop out there. Everybody knows this. Let me draw the arrows, because I shouldn't say things like everybody knows this. But yeah, I mean, with his pawn already on c4, then he's gonna end up trapping the bishop. So the
exactly.
bishop can either take the knight or go all the way back to e7. E7's not terrible though, because your bishop on c1 could end up going to g5. We don't know yet. Let's see what your opponent does. He plays bishop e7. He does not take your knight.
No, and exactly. And this was an interesting moment because in my head, I thought I was slightly familiar with, lines where black
Mm-hmm.
takes on d2. And he actually hesitated. I distinctly remember he hesitated. He touched the bishop. Then he, without letting go of the piece, he started to pick it up to move it forward. Then he put it back on b4, and then he decided, he thought for another 30 seconds and he brought it back to
Wow.
e7. So it was almost like like in basketball, like a fake
Yeah.
shot
Maybe he
attempt,
was
or
judging your
like
reaction a little bit. You think you had any
possibly.
tells while you were sitting? Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very possible. Very possible that I was like, oh yeah, like that's exactly what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted him to do. He played this move bishop b7, which, like you said, is actually it is also played by a number of grandmasters too. At the time, though, I didn't really know that. I was surprised because it lets me take the full center here with
Yeah.
e4, and to me, at first glance, that looked like a. It turns out it's not quite so simple, but white does have the advantage of more space and a lot more central control, which for me was like, oh, that's like an easy
Mm-hmm.
move to play.
You can look at your position and see that you're still maintaining an advantage, and that's a nice
Hmm.
feeling when you have the white pieces. Black plays d5, so he strikes at your center right then.
Yep. This makes a lot of sense that he can't let me just take over
Mm-hmm.
the entire center without challenging it. And at this point, I chose to push forward
Yep.
with e5. There's a little bit of base. And at this point, I think he made probably a small mistake. So he's got a few options with the knight. The knight's attacked. He can go backwards to d7. Uh, Going backwards to e8 is very, very
Mm-hmm.
passive, I think. And alternatively, he can go forward to move squares like e4, g4. Going to g4 doesn't make a lot of sense. You can kick the knight away very easily with h3. Going to e4 makes a little bit of sense, but I think it's a mistake because it ends up helping white develop his pieces a little bit. And the knight on d7 turns out to be the much more popular move because black's next move is going to be
Mm-hmm.
c5. So if you can imagine, the knight on f6 goes to d7, the pawn on c7 moves up to c5. Black's really trying to undermine white's pawn chain there on d4 and
Yep.
e5. And so this becomes sort of the plan for how does black combat sort of the space advantage and the central advantage that white has. Instead, Granda played forward to knight e4, and I think that gives up some chance that we'll see to both play a quick c5, but also that knight on d7 is not there anymore, so he's just got a little bit less pressure. Sorry, the e5 d4 pawn chain, and that becomes a problem for him later
Mm-hmm.
on in the game.
And his knight seems a little bit more of a target than a threat on e4.
Yeah, exactly. And so if I trade on e4 right away, he just takes back, and my knight on
Uh
f3
huh.
doesn't have a great square. But to your point, I play bishop d3, and now he doesn't have an easy way to guard that knight again. And so what ends up happening is he
Mm-hmm.
trades on d2, and this just helps me develop my bishop
Um,
on d2, actually.
just out of curiosity, if he had attempted to play pawn to f5 there, would you have taken en passant and then his knight goes back?
Exactly. No, and that's right. F5 is the only way to guard the
Uh
knight, I
huh.
guess, on its own. The knight probably has to recapture on f6 afterwards. Knight takes
Mm-hmm.
f6. And I think that position's a little bit better for white because that e6 pawn is kind of backward and a little bit weak. So
Yeah.
it's not like game over by any stretch of the imagination, but it's probably a small positional advantage for me
Yeah,
again.
it's one of those where sometimes a player will look at it and say I can't play f5 because of en passant, forgetting that yeah the knight moves backwards.
Yeah, the knight can
Yeah,
recapture, so he doesn't lose any material there for
yeah,
sure.
it's a
Yep.
neat little bit of interrelationship between a knight on it's a common pattern that happens. Yeah.
That's 100% true. I think you'll see it in the open Ruy
Mm-hmm.
Lopez, for example. It's a common pattern. It's in a few different openings where Black has this idea of supporting that advanced knight outpost with F5, and it's all because the knight can recapture after en passant.
So knight takes d2, and then you get to develop your bishop. Just one square, but it's
Yep,
yeah, it's
and it's
it's
just
out
a
of the
free
back
development
rank.
move. Yeah,
And
that,
then
yep,
dxc4. So you had already placed your bishop on d3, and now that bishop is being compelled to move again.
yep.
And um, and when it goes to c4, it's not as much of a threat to the king. Um,
Exactly. The bishop on d3 menaces the
mm-hmm.
h7 pawn a little bit. So you can imagine some possible
Sure.
attacking combinations for white. Black's main idea here is to the fact that normally it would take my bishop only one move to reach c4, and
Mm-hmm.
here it's taken it two. So in a way,
Yeah.
he's gained a tempo.
Yeah. And did you think about just maybe gambiting that pawn just for a second? Maybe like bishop c2 and keep your
Yeah, and then
yeah.
maybe queen
Uh-huh.
e2, something like that to follow. I think I thought about it for a second, but I also didn't see a
Uh-huh.
clear attack afterwards. I'm probably one or two moves away. So if my queen were on e2, I think that would be a very
Sure.
normal kind of idea. Or if my pawn
Mm-hmm.
was already on h4, then you've already actually
Yeah.
highlighted bishop takes h7. But bishop takes h7 and knight
Yeah.
g5 might already
So
be
if
sort
he
of
had one of
available to
these
me. And
two
so,
already
yep.
played, then he might just leave that pawn and
Yeah.
attack. But yeah, we're seeing that. Remember that bishop e7 move? It's kind of it slows down White's attack just a little bit right now
Hmm.
because White would want h4 already played, and it's not been. So bishop takes c4. Now the bishop's it's on the
Hmm.
same diagonal as the king, but not nearly as threatening. And your opponent got it to move a
Yep.
second time. And he also gets to make his own decision here. You're not compelling him to do anything right away.
Yeah,
So he
there's no
plays
threats.
pawn to b6.
Looks, I think, pretty normal to
Mm-hmm.
me. It's actually what I expected during the game as well. I realized afterwards, and he also realized afterwards, that it wasn't the best defensive setup. What he's hoping to do is activate his bishop on
Sure.
c8, right? So, one of the challenges that you'll face in your own games, right, is that like, okay, how do I develop my pieces like at this point? And he needs to bring his knight and his bishop out, and this is the most natural way to activate the bishop. The one downside is that it doesn't give a clear home for that knight on
Mm-hmm.
b8. And so there might have been another way to try and organize a defensive setup here. He could have played bishop d7, bishop c6,
Ah.
and then square is left open for the knight. So then he plays knight b8 to d7,
Uh-huh.
knight d7 to b6, and knight b6 to d5.
Wow.
Um,
So
and so I
using
think
a
that
couple a
probably
couple
was a better
other
defensive setup.
uh, you know two moves to get the bishop on the same diagonal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same two moves. Even in this one, it takes two moves to get the bishop on the
Mm-hmm.
diagonal. But the key advantage of the bishop on c6 versus b7 is that it leaves the b6
Whoops.
square open for that black
Yeah.
knight to come. And then from b6, it can get to the
Let me
nice
back
central
up
square
just a
d5.
second because I realized that yeah. So what Vinay is saying is something like this, um, and it's an alternative setup. But I have to say,
Hmm.
the b6 just looks so natural. You know.
I agree, and it's what I was thinking I would
Yeah.
play in this position too. It wasn't until I had to actually deal with it that I was like, oh, there might be some problems with this
And
opening.
yeah, Khalil, yeah, we'll let you get your question in right after this game. I think he has a general question for you, not to do with the
Oh, sure.
not to do with the game. So Khalil, Yeah, go ahead and make note of your question, and we'll ask it right after this game. All right, so B6 seems 100% natural, but maybe not the best upon really close inspection. And then you play Queen E2, which is an interesting choice here. Um, why did you play Queen E2 at this point instead of maybe castling or Queen C2? Um, what what what's going through your mind?
Both those moves are actually totally fair. The main reason for Queen E2 is I figured he wanted to put the
Mm-hmm.
bishop on B7, but this stops some bishop A6
Ah,
ideas as
yeah.
well. And I'm gonna castle
Mm-hmm.
actually very soon anyway. Kind of just a small thing of just want to see what he's gonna do. If he's not paying attention, maybe I get to play Queen E4
Mm-hmm.
next, but he would have to really fall asleep at the wheel for that. So.
Yeah. Um, so bishop b7 as expected, and then you castle as
Yep.
expected. And really, I mean, you're following classical principles very nicely here. You've got two pawns in the center, not just one. You're castled, and your rooks
Hmm.
are unified. Um, and black plays a5. Um, I, is this just to stop you from doing anything with b4, or does he have something else that he's thinking?
I think he may have wanted to stop some stuff with B4. Maybe he was still thinking about Bishop A6 or Knight A6
Ah, yes, yes,
ideas.
yeah.
Uh, I think this is where he's struggling to figure out what does he do with that knight on B8 because it just doesn't have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of prospects. And so he's hoping, I think, for Knight A6 and
Mm-hmm.
C5, for example, as one way to fight against White's pawn center. But to your point earlier, I think I'm following a lot of classical principles in this game, and he's trying to bend those rules and skirt those rules in some ways, and in this
Yeah, he
case, it doesn't work out for him.
does he have the style, known style of being slightly unorthodox? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's fair. I would say that for a lot of grandmasters, they can play in a
Uh-huh.
lot of different styles. But Julio is somebody who I think, like I mentioned, I feel like he was
Yeah.
self-taught in a lot of ways, and so he may not have studied all the same books that
Mm-hmm.
you or I studied, and so I think that's where he's come up with some of his own
Yeah.
ideas as
Yeah.
well.
And maybe, I think he just, likes to be creative. Um,
Yeah, no, exactly. I like super nice guy and obviously a very strong
well,
chess player
after
too. So,
after we talked last time, I went and just kind of, was going through some of his games in the database, and yeah, I mean,
mhm.
he's kind of a very creative chess player. Um,
Yeah,
fun to go through. All right, you play Rook A to C1. And that was the only piece he hadn't touched yet. So you're
yeah, that's
following,
true. Yeah.
just the Chernev move by move, logical chess move by move, classical principles. Everything makes just beautiful sense. The rook has a lot more scope in the c file, and then your opponent, he plays Rook A7. Another interesting, creative, um, and possibly not the best choice. Maybe trying to be a little too creative
I, I
here.
think I think he is getting a little too creative, trying to figure out how to develop
Mm-hmm.
all his queen side, and so he's got this idea in mind of the rook on A7, the knight on A6, the queen on A8, and then he can play
Mm-hmm.
C5 safely. But it's a little slow, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe that rook on A7. Even after he plays C, if he gets a couple moves in a row,
Yeah,
Yeah.
then I think he's totally fine. That rook may come
Exactly.
to
Yeah,
d7,
he
for
gets a
example,
battery if he gets a
challenge the
couple
d
moves in a
file.
row. But
So
you're not going
yeah,
to give him a couple moves in a row. Whoops!
nope,
What
not his
happened
birthday.
there? I hit the down button again. There we go. Um, Rook F to D1. Um,
Yep. So again, just classical
mm-hmm.
approach.
Getting the rook in the same file as your opponent's queen. Knight
Hmm.
A6, just like we were expecting. And then you just move your bishop to E3. What's going on there?
Part of it is he's telegraphing this idea of
Uh huh.
c5, and so right now, if he plays c5, I'll play d takes c5, and my
Yep.
rook hits the queen.
Immediately.
So partly it's preparing for some eventual c5 advance from him. Partly I'm thinking about some ways of how can I improve my pieces a little bit. The bishop on d2
Mm-hmm.
was developed, but it wasn't really doing all that much. And so I'm looking at some ways here to try and rearrange. And so yeah, I think bishop e3 was mostly just aimed against the
Mm-hmm.
c5 move. It's still a question of how he's going to
And
develop.
I guess maybe based on the fact that you played bishop e3, your opponent decides maybe c5 isn't, what I'm going to do because Vinay looks prepared for this, and he plays queen
Yeah.
a8. So he builds a different kind of battery. When he played rook a7, we were thinking he might get a queen on d8, rook d7, and now he's got a queen coordinating with his bishop on the big diagonal. Was that a surprise to you, Vinay?
At this point, not so much, but it is a little annoying. You can see that he's starting to take on my knight
Mm-hmm.
double, my example. And so he clearly has some ideas still. And like you said before, if he gets one or two free moves, it feels like he will be able to unwind from his position. And so at this point, the real question for me was, okay, so he's got four pieces bunched up on the queen side. You've got the queen, rook, bishop, and knight. Nobody, all those are on the queen side. Nobody's on the king side. So how can I bring more pieces of mine to the king
I
side?
think I think we'll
And
throw this question out to the
mhm.
viewers. This is a little bit of a tricky position. A lot of players could go wrong here. Because yeah, as Vinay said, he's threatening the knight on f3, which is defended twice, but it would mess up the pawn structure, right?
Hmm.
Um, so we have Rohan suggesting maybe bishop d3, but Rohan, that doesn't help with this bishop takes f3, and neither would queen d3. But good suggestions. Anybody else want to try and guess Vinay's move here? It's a little bit of a tricky position.
How about if anybody considering any moves with the knight itself?
It's true. The knight is, being threatened right now. Knight h4 is suggested, but
Okay.
unfortunately, there's that bishop on e7, right, Vinay?
Yeah. Otherwise, knight h4 would almost certainly
Uh
be
huh.
the best move here. Um,
Knight g5 is being suggested. Um,
Knight g5 is an interesting one. I think I did look at that
mhm.
briefly because there's some ideas of if the bishop takes a pawn on g2, I can attack with queen g4, for example.
Ooh, yeah.
But there are some ideas there
Uh
for
huh.
sure. I I do think though that like probably if black takes the knight first and then takes the pawn on g2, it's just a little bit less. It's a little bit less
Yeah.
clear. Yeah, and so that one felt a little bit
Yeah.
messy to me. But knight g5, I like the idea because you're going after that e6 pawn, you're going after the h7 pawn. Ideally, that's what I would be able
Well,
to do here,
nobody's chimed in with the move. Everybody was forward thinking, and
which is
yeah,
normally a good
which is
thing.
normally a good thing. But Vinay does something really kind of pretty here. he moves his knight to e1, and it does at least three things for him. Number one, the knight's not going to get taken, and the pawns aren't going to get doubled. Number two, and Khalil says, wow, that's good. It is. It's a really pretty move. Number two, it's defending g2. And number three, it moves out of the queen's way. There may even be a fourth good thing that I haven't noticed yet. But it does a lot of good for you. Right, Vinay?
No, I think you hit it all. And like the main thing is I want to be able to bring
Mm-hmm.
my queen into the attack. So similar to that idea with knight g5, for example, I want to bring the queen to g4, h5. The other advantage is, maybe with the third rank open, I can
Ah,
bring a rook
yeah.
up
A
eventually
rook
afterwards as
elevator.
well. So um, that would be kind of the dream
Yeah.
attack in some ways.
Yeah, it was a really nice move. Everybody's really enjoying your move in chat. Black plays Rook D8, um, getting their rook a lot more scope. And now
Hmm.
your queen advances to G4. Um, and you're starting this big attack, and a lot of your opponent's pieces are in this far away quadrant of the board. It looks very interesting.
Yeah, it's he's got almost all his
Mm-hmm.
pieces on the queen side. And kind of like I said earlier, I'm looking to bring more
Mm-hmm.
pieces to the king side. And so that's why I was willing to go backwards with the knight for one move, because my next moves could be maybe I'm threatening bishop h6, maybe I'm threatening to take on e6 in some ways, maybe I'm threatening to bring up the rook via c3 over to,
Mm-hmm.
g3 or h3 later too. So there are a lot
Bishop
of attacking
h6, he
ideas.
mentioned, rook c3. And none of these ideas is this knight interfering on e1. And Vinay's got
Mhm.
enough force. He doesn't need the knight in the attack. The, he's commands the center of the board, and has the squares available because of that to add force easy. Knight b8. So your opponent does a backward move of his own. Not nearly as pretty as yours. Um, and let me. I think right now might be a good time to ask another question to the viewers. What would you do here as white? I think this is a really fun time to ask this question. Go ahead, look at your checks, captures, and threats. So Rohan is still thinking the bishop h6, and then the rook lift. And that still looks pretty good, right, Vinay? Yeah.
Yeah, that I think is White's definitely got the attack there, definitely an advantage. But I think Rohan, I think if
Mm-hmm.
I got your name right, Rohan, then you can you found one good move. Now take a look
And
for something
Khalil
even
is
better.
thinking bishop b5. Um,
Okay, okay.
yeah,
Opening up the rook
yeah.
on c1. Yeah. Okay.
But there's still, something a little bit better. Again, look at your checks, captures, and threats. I think we saw that lesson earlier this week. Anybody see a good check, capture, or threat? Bishop h6 was a good threat. It was.
Yeah, that's a big threat.
Oh,
And actually, both
Khalil, your actual
ideas.
name is Ten May. Okay, excellent. And Rohan gets it. Rohan says bishop takes e6. So that,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yep. And both ideas were correct between bishop h6 and bishop b5 of I want to get the attack going on the king side. I want to open up the rook on c1. Bishop takes e6 kind of supercharges some of that.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets it done faster.
And your opponent takes back, and then your queen
Hmm.
takes check, king to f8, and the next move's not too Yeah, he is a wonderful player, huh? Um, the next move isn't too hard. Anybody want to? Um, there's something that White could do that's pretty easy to spot here. If you want to take a moment to yeah, Rook takes
Yeah, it's spot
C7 is
on.
what both of you guys meant. I know. One of you got you're doing a classic Coach Chris kind of things. First, you think it's F7, it's C7, and then you think it's C2. That is C7. Yeah, happens to the best of us. Yeah, take the pawn, and now Vinay's threatening a mate in two, and
Hmm.
black. Um, this is he resigns here. I guess he could potentially put the knight in between um, to discon to block the rook. So like knight d7 maybe.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
then what would you do? You just take it, right? I mean,
Probably the
it's
easiest
a
at that
free
point is
yeah,
just take the
it's
knight.
a free
Uh,
night. Yeah.
he could hang on to the piece by playing
Uh
knight
huh.
c6. My plan was bishop g5.
Ooh, that's mean.
If he takes the bishop, I'll give a checkmate on f7.
Yep.
And so again, I'm putting a little bit more pressure on e7, and he can guard that bishop one more time with rook
Uh
e8.
huh.
I play rook d3. And now
Ooh.
there's checkmate coming on, or there's a check coming from
Yeah.
f3, and that bishop on e7 is still pinned because if it ever moves, queen f7 is checkmate. So this is why he resigned because he's either going to have to give back the material, in which case he's
Mm-hmm.
down three pawns already, or it's going to be worse than just a
Yep.
piece.
Yep. That was a really pretty game. That was a really pretty game. And let's see. Tanmay, what was your question? You had a question for Vinay, right, Tanmay? Go ahead, type your question. We'll go ahead and ask it now. If anybody else has a question for Vinay, um, okay, here it goes. He says, yeah, I do. So we're waiting. Yeah, no pressure either. Take your time typing it in. I'll show Vinay's book again. It's a fantastic book. If you enjoyed this game, and now this game wasn't actually in the book, right, Vinay?
Oh no, this game was in the book. The next game,
Oh,
however, is
that's right.
not.
This game
Um,
was in the book. Yeah.
and it's partly because the book has a lot of my, most important games. Sometimes they're wins, sometimes they're
Mm-hmm.
losses. The next game I thought was really interesting. It was a fun one to play, but it again illustrates some of the classical principles, but some attacking chess too, which I thought was pretty
Yeah.
neat.
Tanmay says, so I was just wondering how to become a better player and take it to the next level because my USCF is 1134.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so he's at 1134, which is a respectable rating for a young person, and he wants to know how what he should do to take it to the next level. So it's kind of a general question because you don't know you haven't gone through his game history um, to see precisely. But in general, a young player with an 1134 rating, Vinay, what do you suggest?
The biggest thing I would recommend is probably working on simple
Mm-hmm.
tactics. So it's getting really comfortable spotting those one, two, maybe three move kind of
Yep.
combinations. What you'll notice in your games are that the opening moves, people don't know a ton of opening theory. So studying a lot of opening lines may not, you may not get to recreate too many
Uh-huh.
of those and there are going to be mistakes that might happen later. So similar to this game here, where there's this combination with bishop takes e6. This might be a little bit more complicated than the ones that you're doing for, say, one and two, three movers, but those are the kinds of problems like that 1001 simple winning
Mm-hmm.
checkmates, 1001 simple
Yep.
combinations. Those are the kinds of puzzle books that I would highly recommend because they build up that muscle. Think of it as like similar to doing basketball drills or soccer drills or any other sort of game or sport. You're practicing some of the movements that really kind of finish
Mm-hmm.
games and get you an advantage. And so I think those are the biggest things that I would recommend. I think if you get good at those kinds of simple tactics, you'll shoot up from 11:30. I think next time we talk, you'll be way ahead of that.
And we have another question. Oh, and by the way, that winning Fred Reinfeld's 1001 chess combinations, I really like the layout because it goes by theme. So there's like a whole chapter on removing the guard. There's a whole chapter on, you know, sacrifice on H7. There's a whole chapter on, just different major tactical themes. I really like that. It really pounds in some of the big themes, and so if you're missing something, you can routinely in your chess games you can spend some time just on that one chapter, and then it refreshes your brain and you're spotting those things. Um, some of the games, Freddie Huang says, some of the games I play really good and some I play really bad and make a lot of mistakes. How do I fix that?
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
another good question. And there's probably a couple things that but for Freddie, do you have a chess coach already? I'm just curious, by the way.
Freddie, go ahead and say if you have a chess coach already, or if you're studying independently.
And the reason I
Mm-hmm.
asked that question is that I think there's probably a couple different ways to try and sort of work on that. So, like Chris mentioned, sort of that previous book was organized by theme of like, how do I win some of these kinds of positions by removing a defender or attacking sort of an exposed king, things like
Yep.
that, right? And so if you notice some of the patterns in your own game, or sometimes a chess coach can help you with this of, okay, let me look at some of the recent losses that you've had and say, okay, you're missing this kind of pattern, then you can work on that kind of pattern and build up that part of your game. I think one of the things that I struggled with as a kid was that I enjoyed working on certain parts of the game, like doing tactical puzzles. And I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to study other
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But like chess games, often, there's a bunch of different kinds of problems that you can encounter. And so you want to be at least a little bit familiar with a lot of different kinds of problems. You want to have some breadth, some variety in your game. And so I think there are a couple things there of like try and identify what the pattern is, and a chess coach can really help with that. They can look at some recent losses and say, okay, like let's find, yes, this was the wrong
Mm-hmm.
move, but what was behind the wrong move? If you're studying on your own, the habit I would try and recommend is just make a note at the end of the game. So after the tournament, if you've got the score sheet, you can make a little note saying, okay, what is something I did well? What is something I didn't do well in this game? And then if you look at those score sheets for a few different losses, you'll say, okay, in this game, the thing I didn't do well was I didn't develop all my
Mm-hmm.
pieces. In this other game, you'll say that, oh, when he attacked, I didn't have many pieces around for defense. And you'll start to connect the dots there, being like, okay, maybe I need to use more of my pieces in the game instead of playing with just, say, the few pieces that are already developed. And so annotating your own games, going over your own games can help a lot. But that is one place where a chess coach can also do a lot
Yeah,
for you.
but yeah, big time. Annotate all the games you play. And at a lot of tournaments, there are chess coaches who would be happy to go through the game with you, even if they're not your chess
Hmm.
coach. And you can go through the game with your opponent afterwards. Chess.com has the game analysis. You can click right afterwards, and you'll start to see some themes in where you're going wrong, and then you can work on those. Rohan the Great has a question for you. During a really important match or again, excuse me, during a really important match or a game against someone who is much higher than you, much higher rated than you, do you sometimes get stressed? Because when I play someone higher, I get stressed and overcomplicate things. How do I deal with that?
This is another good question. And yes, I also feel the same way. Typically, what happens for me is I get really nervous before
Mm-hmm.
the game. And especially if I know that I'm playing somebody who's so I played Magnus Carlsen, for example, in 2014. It was a blitz game, but I was a little nervous before, for sure, right? I'm playing the
Sure.
world champion. I've played Fabiana Caruana more recently. I've played Hikaru Nakamura a number of times. Typically, I do get nervous before the game, and that's normal. I think that's if you don't get nervous, you may not be you may be superhuman,
Yeah.
really. Um, I think the key thing is, okay, how do you react once the game has started? How do you find ways to sort of kind of calm your own nerves? And for me, once the game started, typically I felt a little bit better because the pieces move for them the same they move for you, right? Like whether they're higher rated or not, everything on the chessboard behaves the same way. And so now it's okay. It's something that I can try my best. I can see what happens. I can try to control the outcome. I will say that when playing a higher rated player, I think it's okay to try and make the position
Mm-hmm.
complicated. There's a lot of different ways to try and approach it, right? You can say that I want to play a very safe game. I'm going to try to exchange all the pieces. I'm going to try and make a draw. Or you can say, let me give this guy the chance to make a mistake. And for me, when I was playing higher rated players, I typically did the same thing. I think that you're recommending, Rohan, there of complicating the position. I like to attack, and so I would try and go on the attack against them. And sometimes that didn't work, sometimes it worked. But that's partly how I learned. And it's partly by understanding sort of, okay, why didn't this attack work, right? So in this game against Granda, the attack worked. I think another chapter later in the book, maybe one or two chapters later, it's one of my favorite games, but that attack didn't work for me. But I really enjoyed playing the game. And still against that grandmaster, I learned a little bit about how to defend better. And that then fed a new aspect of my own game. So I talk about some of my attacking games, then I talk about how I learned how to defend
Mm-hmm.
really well. Part of the reason I learned to defend really well is that's like it's like a left hand, right hand of like attack and defense. If you get really good at attacking, you also learn to anticipate your opponent's defenses
Sure.
too, in some way. And so, like, it's okay to complicate the game against higher rated players. It's okay to lose. I lost. I've played probably more than like 1,000 rated games in my life, and I've lost
Mm-hmm.
hundreds. So, like, it's okay to lose games. That's partly how you get better. If all I did was play against my mom once I got a little bit better than her, yeah, like I would have felt good to win a lot of games, but I wouldn't have probably kept getting better for a while. So I think nerves are okay. Just remember that the pieces move for them the same they move for you. So once the game starts, take a few deep breaths, and now you can just play normal chess. And it's okay to complicate the game against a higher rated player. Who knows? There's a book I read as a kid called Chess for
Mm-hmm.
Tigers. I don't know, Chris, if you read that book or
Yeah, I
remember
have
that
it in
book.
my
Uh,
library too. Yeah.
Simon Webb, I think,
What's that?
maybe. Simon Webb, was that the
Yeah.
author's name?
Sadly, I
Or
I think he passed away.
um, yeah, I think he passed away. But he had this book called Chess for Tigers, which was It was, it had funny
Mm-hmm.
illustrations. It's not really a chess book in the sense of it gives tactics puzzles or gives you specific opening advice. But one of his things was sort of like, the higher rated player is a bit like, the tiger, where you're afraid of the tiger, but you have some tools that you can use to try and get ahead of them. And sometimes that's dragging them into a complicated position where the cost of a mistake is pretty high, right? If you win a queen for free against a higher rated player, that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And like they may not be able to come back from that. And so they're more likely to make those kinds of mistakes in a complicated position. And so that was sort of the philosophy that I
Yeah.
followed.
Yeah, and just one, I had one more question. So I'm making notes on
Mhm.
these books that you mentioned, Vinay. Um,
Mhm.
and uh, what what book do you remember using to help you with your end games?
Okay. There were two books that really that were really useful for me. One was a book called Pandolfini's
This is a
Endgame
great one.
Course.
Yeah.
It has a lot of the basic checkmates and basic endgame
Mm-hmm.
patterns highlighted. And the second book was by Irving Chernev called, I think, Capablanca's Best
Ah,
Chess
another
Endings.
really good one. Yeah.
Um, these are, yeah, I mean, the Capablanca's Best Chess Endings book was probably one of my favorite books, just like of all time as a kid. Uh, he annotates a lot of the Capablanca games in full, but he gives specific emphasis to the end game
Mm-hmm.
play. And I really liked the way he described those positions and like the strategy behind it. For me, that was actually it made actually studying end games a lot easier because I did not really enjoy studying a lot of theoretical end games. But Pandolfini's Endgame course was the book I got when I was about probably rated about a
Mm-hmm.
thousand. And then I think I started working with that Capablanca's Best Chess Endings book probably around 1300,
Yep.
1400. But yeah, those were the two books that definitely made the
And
biggest
the
impression on me.
Pandolfini course is like a lot of puzzles based on
Yep.
the most famous kind of endgame instructive positions. So a lot of elementary endgames in puzzle form, and it's just absolutely fantastic. Easy to work with. And the other book, Capablanca's Best Endings, really helps you with your endgame strategy. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, you can think of Pandolfini. I don't want to oversimplify things, but Pandolfini's is a lot of endgame tactics and finding the best move. And the Chernev is more about endgame thinking. Um,
No, that's a really good way of describing it. I think to me it's like that's similar to how I would envision it of Pandolfini is the
mm-hmm,
simple ones where it's say like king and pawn
mm-hmm,
versus king or two bishops versus a king. How do
yeah,
I checkmate, right? Chernev's book on Capablanca takes it a little bit earlier of like, okay, how do before I get to that simple position, or simplified position,
mm-hmm,
sorry, not simple necessarily, simplified position, how do I go from an end game where it's rook and five pawns plus a knight against rook and four pawns plus a bishop? How do I go from that kind of end game to a simplified one, which I know is going to
yeah,
be winning, right? Because I know king and pawn versus king is winning in some kind of
mm-hmm,
positions, right? And so, what's the strategy behind that, like Chris was saying? So the two I think are very complementary. Um, yeah, I have a soft spot for all the books by Irving Chernev, I think, just because he really loves chess, or he really loved chess. He's no longer, these are old books
yeah,
in a lot of ways. But he really loved chess, and that comes across in the writing, and he simplifies sometimes some complex
mm-hmm,
concepts that were actually very relatable for me as like even as a kid. So, but these were the books that I was, heavily reliant on as call it 1000 to 1300, 1400. And I kept working with the Capablanca's Endgame book. I think I read and reread that must have been seven, eight times. I really loved that
Yeah,
entire book.
yeah.
So,
It starts off really nice. I know. I think it was last year. I showed the Capablanca Tartakower game, and the first time I ever
okay,
saw
yeah.
that game was in this Chernev book that Vinay's talking about. And one of the interesting final point here is um, a lot of the young players today have very fast ways of video, watching YouTube videos on various chess topics, or using a tactics trainer for puzzles. Um, but it might be nice for some of you younger players out there to pick up a chess book, and I think you'll find it a nice way, a nice change of pace. So I took notes on all the books that Vinay mentioned. I have all the books Vinay mentioned, and I'll make a blog post about that in the near future, so you guys can go and take a look at that. And Vinay, I think we'll save your other game for next time. Yeah.
That sounds good. One, maybe two other notes quickly on the
Sure.
sort of the book comment. I love the questions, and uh, partly I'm smiling because like these are some of the things that I learned
Mm-hmm.
over time. Two things about on the book side. One was there was another less. We talked a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
tactics books, an endgame, simplified endgame, and then more endgame
Mm-hmm.
strategy book. Another book I used a lot at the time was The Most Instructive Games of
Ah,
Chess Ever
yeah.
Played by Nev. And that was more about general strategy. So, how do I take advantage of weak squares or a badly placed piece? And the second note I want to make that Chris mentioned that sometimes there's a lot of online training, sort of video courses, or some of you may be using Chess Kit or
Mm-hmm.
Chess Tempo for tactics training, for example. There's a little bit of a difference when you see the board in 2D on a screen versus are actually playing it. So for some of you who are looking at your own games, and I forget who asked the question about, hey, sometimes there's certain games where I see certain things really well, and there are other games sometimes where I don't. One of the things I did was that I often solved puzzles just sort of in the 2D format, just looking at a
Mm-hmm.
book position, but I often tried to actually physically set up the position on a board to get used to, I've got to see the whole board, right? Like if you're sitting down as a little kid, okay, you've got to be able to look at the whole board and sort of process the whole board. When you're looking at it on a 2D screen, it's actually very easy to see where all the
Mm-hmm.
pieces are. And pretend there was a tactic in the board that Chris has open right now. Pretend in some imaginary world, this queen on A8 for black could come all the way to G2, for
Mm-hmm.
example. And there's a checkmate there. That's easier to see on a 2D board because you can see the entire thing in one go. But when you're sitting at the board, over the board, sometimes for little kids, it's hard to keep that whole board in mind. And so that was one thing I did to try and just practice that visualization aspect
Mm-hmm.
with tactics of having to see the whole board. So for me, those were two things that one book and one sort of approach to studying that
Yeah,
were really
and
valuable for me.
Vinay mentioned earlier in our discussion today that in fact his parents used to set up puzzles for him on a chessboard when he was young. And when you think about it, a little person sits lower to the chessboard and can't adjust their posture to get and it's a longer turn of the neck to see the big
Yeah.
diagonal versus looking at a small diagram in a book or on your phone screen if you're playing chess on your iPad or your iPhone. And yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah.
So yeah, if some of you notice that, hey, my online tactics rating is better than my over the board tactics sort
Mm-hmm.
of, skill level, that might be something you can consider of, hey, maybe I set up a few puzzles on the board itself, just to get in that habit of having to look at sort of a bigger board and keep
Hmm.
that whole thing in mind.
And do you think it's helpful, when doing that, if you have somebody who's willing to do it for you, to have them set up the board, or so it's more of a surprise
That was
factor?
something because I think you mentioned earlier the notation thing of rook
Hmm.
takes f7, rook takes c2. I sometimes made those same mistakes, and so sometimes I would set up the problems
Oh,
incorrectly.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's where my mom would also help a little bit, where I did some problems on the board, and then I did more problems sort of on the paper in a
Yeah.
2D format. But she helped me sometimes because I would not set them up
Yeah.
correctly. So
Yeah. Always important when you're setting up your board to double check. Double check. When I'm double checking, I like to go up and down each file real fast, and make sure
yep.
that, because if you're missing one thing, yeah, you could spend 15 minutes trying to solve something that's not possible. Um, and,
Yeah,
and, and this
exactly.
happens quite frequently. Vinay, thank you so much. Um, very soon, you guys are going to find out who wins the book. If you don't win the book, you can order one. And they're available in both digital and book form, physical and digital. And we're giving the physical. So even if you win a physical, I recommend get the digital as well. And this way you have it in both formats. And you can keep one really nice in your library, and read the other a lot on your device. Um, and yes, the book is signed. All these copies that we're giving away are autographed, and um, this this book is starting to really uh, uh, gain popularity very quickly. And you heard Vinay; he's going to go to New York and Toronto, so this is going to be a topic of discussion very soon. And you guys can be some of the first to own a copy. So thank you so much, Vinay. Congratulations on getting this book and filling it. It is just it has everything that we would want in a chess book. It's written in a personable, down to earth approach. It's full of wonderful instruction, uh, interesting stories, has fills in interesting history, that needs to be talked about. Basically the late '80s and '90s California chess, and it's different. Scholastic chess looks so much different now. So much is still the same, but it's so much different, and you guys are gonna love seeing the pictures and reading the stories. Thank you so much, Vinay. Have a great day. Is there anything else you want to mention before you leave?
No, I'm good on my side, but just want to say thanks again, Chris, for having me on, and thanks to all of you who are sort of tuned in, asking great questions. I love the questions, and like these are, yeah, I think I went through a lot of the same challenges myself as a kid learning how to play. So best of luck, and yeah, again, thank you all
Thank
for
you,
being here.
Vinay. And everybody, we're going to let you get to your lessons, and I'll be checking in with you later on. Bye.